All right, welcome to episode 85 of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined by Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, it's training camp season. We got tons of news, right? I felt like the last couple weeks we were sort of fishing for news every single week and, coming up with cool little narratives to talk about. And now it's like we're drinking from the fire hose, right? Like there's just opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to sort of talk about this league that we love and that you were a part of for so many years. How you doing today?
I'm good. I mean, I am so happy that training camp is starting. I love the freshness of this part of the season. Brings back a lot of memories, as you could imagine. But I'm doing it from afar now, and I'm actually enjoying it. And by the way, you're looking fresh with your haircut. Look like you're ready to jump into the season.
Well, it's every once in a while, like you do all these shows, right? And I'm out there trying to promote Sumer. I'm trying to promote, evidence-based thinking in the world of sports. And one day I look at something on Twitter. I'm like, Eric, you look like you just got done with Woodstock, man. Like you gotta figure this thing out. So of course, and I'm inspired by you. On Saturday, I got up in the morning, did a little work, then I got on my bike. I biked a few miles to the hairdresser. And, it probably wasn't a great experience for her with me, like sweating through my shirt, like hair all over the place. But, you do what you do. I gave her a big tip. I'm going to be honest with you because I felt bad. I went to the gym afterwards. So I'm looking a little thinner too. Like I feel like, I'm trying my best here. But yeah, I mean, look, the world is a zero-sum game. So I benefit from biking, of course, and getting that workout in. The poor woman that cut my hair, of course, had to deal with that, but that happens.
I literally have never gone in the modern ages to a place to get my hair cut, having sweat, and not showered. That's maybe a quirky little thing because I'm thinking I feel bad for the the stylist or whatever we're calling them. So you go there, just so I'm clear, sweaty. I'm talking south sweat, right? We're talking.
Yeah, my issue was I felt like, okay, if I get up early, it's going to be cooler out, but maybe the hair place isn't going to be open. And, I'm new here, so I don't know. So then I wait until about 11, which feels like 11 feels normal, but it's feels like a reasonable time. But it's honest to goodness, Thomas, 95 and humid at 11 o'clock. So I'm all like, I'm drinking. And then the best part, I go to the gym, I get in, 225 a bunch of times. I squat 315. I'm doing my thing. I'm actually representing out there for Sumer Sports at the gym. And then I go to Sprouts, the local grocery store, and the cashier lady looks at me like, "What the hell are you doing, man?" Like I'm my shirt's drenched. I'm out here. I'm trying to be a healthy person, but I just don't necessarily know. Maybe if I'm cut out for that, but I got it done, and now we're here on a Monday, and we're talking football.
Talking football, can't wait to dig in. What do you have for me today, man? I can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, dude, there's so many things here. And I think there's things that I think you've obviously dealt with before. And then there are other things that your peers have dealt with before as general managers. The first one I want to talk about, and it might not be top of news. We'll talk about the Colts in a second here. The first thing I want to talk about, though, is your friends in San Francisco, our friends in San Francisco, right now are running Trey Lance, the former third overall pick of the 2021 draft. They're running him third string behind Brock Purdy, the last pick of last year's draft. Sam Darnold, also a third overall pick, but of the Jets in the 2018 draft and on his third team. Not only was he the third pick, Thomas, but he was traded up for a significant amount of investment from our friends in San Francisco. What do you do in that situation? Like, it's a sunk cost at this point, but that player's draft status hangs with them for a long time.
You talk about trading him to Minnesota. What else do you do? I'm joking, of course. By the way, let's see how smart you are. What hometown is he from in Minnesota?
I knew this already. Marshall, Minnesota, because the only reason I know this, Thomas, when I was a junior in college, we played Southwest Minnesota State, which is from Marshall. We played them at the Metrodome my junior year, 2006. That was the career high in catches I ever had in college, was at Metrodome. It was I played at the Metrodome twice. The first time I set my career high in catches. The second time I played at the Metrodome was the week after Adrian Peterson rushed for 297 yards. So those memories stick with you. You know, football, your football life, they stick with you. But yeah, he's a Marshall, Minnesota native. And I like the cut of your jib here with Minnesota, right? Because you look at them, Kirk Cousins is on the final year of his deal. You passed on Will Levis in the draft at 23, right? You took Jordan Addison, their internals must have said they didn't like Will Levis that much. For years, you passed on Pickett, you passed on Willis, Ritter last year. Kwesi's also passed on Levis. He also passed on the opportunity to move up and get any of those other quarterbacks. And so they don't really have a young guy on the roster with any sort of pedigree. Move into Lance here. I actually think so. People talk about, well, you can just wait for next year's draft. The Vikings have a win total in the betting markets of 8.5. They're not bad enough to have a top 5 pick. And so the draft pick you could spend right now for Trey Lance would be, I think, less than what it would take to trade up from, let's say they're picking 16th next year, picking 16th all the way to 2 or 1, which we've seen the price for that before. The Rams did it in 18 or 16. We've also seen, we also saw Cleveland do it, Cleveland trade with Philly for Wentz. Like those pick, that's an expensive move. You could pay a fraction of that price right now for a flyer on Trey Lance.
No question about it. Look, I was jibbing a little bit there. I think that's what you called it. I mean, my thought on it was exactly what you're talking about. What would be an ideal place for him to go? But here's another side of the story that I think needs to be discussed and for people to think about. You're a general manager and a head coach. You make a massive move on trading up for Trey Lance. There's so much banter around it back in the day, right? All the dialogue about it. This is a really, really interesting, big opportunity to discuss at so many levels. You don't believe there's a lot of discussion within that building amid the scouts, the assistant general manager, the head coach, the coordinators, all the supporters, all the dissenters. This becomes a churned topic. And look, I've been around it. When we've drafted first round or second round players, I unfortunately never had a quarterback situation like this because we had Matt Ryan through the entire way. And what I've said to you many times, team builders are judged on their picking of their quarterbacks, right? They've done a hell of a job in San Francisco putting together a really good football team. And they have a quarterback situation, they did it with Garoppolo. There was a quote there recently, it's never easy to be a quarterback in a Kyle Shanahan system for a number of reasons, right? So here they are with this draft pick that everyone's wondering what's going to happen. And my point is, we did it with Rashid Hageman. We did it with Vic Beasley. We did it with Prey Jerry. It is nerve-wracking as the main team builder, i.e. John Lynch, to watch that happen. Mm-hmm. Remember, John and Kyle Shanahan are getting major lauding from their owner, Jed York, the CEO. Loves them. But this is something that will hang over their head, whether it's this year or next year. I will be really interested to see how it plays out and how much stress it puts on the organization that there's another quarterback situation that might be a little uneasy there.
Yeah, in some ways, you look at it and you're like, what's the problem, right? You had Lance, you had Purdy, you hedged that bet there, then you hedged the bet with Darnold. And I think most people believe that whomever starts at quarterback for the Niners will play well because of that offense. And yet at the same time, then you're saying to yourself, well, then why did you feel like you had to invest so much into Lance specifically if the trope is that everybody can succeed in a Shanahan offense? That's not necessarily true, by the way. Like when Garoppolo, the Niners since 2015, Thomas, have either lost 10 or more games or they've made the NFC Championship game. That's divergence. And the years that they've lost 10 or more games, it's because Garoppolo got hurt and the guys like Nick Mullins and CJ Beathard and guys like that were not able to perform. Last year was the outlier where the guy that came in for the injured quarterback actually had some success. And so I think a lot of people over-index on, anybody can succeed in Shanahan's system. It's like, no, like Garoppolo's had success there and Purdy in a small samples had success there. Other places, Hoyer had his best year and RG3 had his best year. But even then, the success there, I think, is a little overblown. So I do think that I do think taking a swing at an elite quarterback in the 2021 draft was not ill-advised. It's just it hasn't worked out yet. And, they bet on traits, right? Lance has only really played like 5 games since 2019. And when he was in college, he only had like 50 pass attempts when trailing, right? So we don't have a ton of data on Lance. And so they took a swing and, maybe it doesn't work. Here's a question for you before we go on to Jonathan Taylor. Like, a similar situation in your career would have been, it's not completely perfect because you can play more than one wide receiver at a time. But if Julio Jones had struggled out of the gate, that would have, like, the question would have been like, what would you have done? Because you're fortunate that you picked the right player and he's a Hall of Famer. But, you put yourself in their shoes and it's similar, right? You paid a hefty sum to move up to get Julio Jones. And if he doesn't succeed right away, like what do you do? Does the coach have to continue to trot him out there and hope that he kind of develops, or what? That's a good question.
Well, look, ballsy moves in the league, I laud all the time. Not flippant, thoughtless, ballsy moves. I'm talking about two guys. John Lynch, tough ass, knows his football players. Kyle Shanahan, a tough guy, knows his system. It's not easy to play for Kyle Shanahan in a quarterback role because his expectations. Yes, he can. The quarterbacks can thrive, but it's short-lived in the sense of you better keep up with it or you're not going to be around for long because the expectations are so high. Julio Jones, just to parallel that, look, I have people in my ears, people lauding, and other people, as I said many times, think you're a dumbass for making moves and you're tying a career to one football player. What are you thinking? If you have that much conviction about it, you're going to do it, and I will never turn my eye on or turn my head on someone who hasn't done that, because you have to do that in this league. You can't be the conservative Nelly sitting on your hands. I like what they do there. I like their moves there. Leave it at this. That said, there is a lot of stress on what they're going to do with this. And when is the right time to do it, Eric? Again, as adept team builders, the two of them, head coach and GM, when do they trade? When don't they? Because if Brock Purdy steps up and he recovers from what he had, his injury, and he continues to sort of mess the minds up of the D coordinators out there who are really good. And I mentioned this to you, second year ins, never an easy thing. These guys have been studying him for a whole year. We'll be interested to see how that quarterback situation plays out.
Yeah, for sure. I once, Brad Childress wasn't perfect in Minnesota, but one thing I really appreciated about him was he said, I'm in my mid 50s. I'm going to do it my way because I only have one shot at this. And I think that your sentiment is true there. And that you only really get, look, like there aren't that many general managers that get more than one opportunity. And so taking big swings at it is probably the way to go out, right? Because, in the case of your career, for example, it got you to the Super Bowl. There's enough, and I think a lot of guys who kind of play it. You look in New York with the Jets, like, they took a swing on Zach Wilson, and really the thing that's keeping them excited coming off a 6-game losing streak at the end of the year is taking a big swing on Aaron Rodgers. And if it works, great. You got lifetime appointments there. If you don't, then but if you wanted to take that shot in the first place.
The key word there, and you added, I don't know if you did, if it was just out of your control, you said go out. And I don't ever, when there are people making those big moves, they don't think they're going out. They think they're going for it, right? They're not making that move saying, hey, well, it's my last move and I'm going to do it, I'm out. And I know you didn't add that for any other reason. That is a big thing. I think the confident guys out there and the confident men who are going to build with aggressiveness believe in all of those moves until they're proven wrong, of course. And I think that's a quality that you have to have in the NFL to be right, to be good, to be a champion.
Yeah. Speaking of a guy who, has taken his shots at times, but, is again, like they haven't had success over the past couple of years. You look at Chris Ballard in Indianapolis, he's dealing with a situation that he really didn't. I don't know if he necessarily opted into this, but there is a spat right now between star running back Jonathan Taylor, who led the NFL in rushing in 2021, one of the more efficient seasons we've ever seen, and Jim Irsay, the owner of the Colts. Jonathan Taylor very clearly looks at the running back situation that we talked about last Monday, and he's saying, I'm going to come up for free agency next year in a year where Saquon Barkley is also a free agent, Josh Jacobs is also a free agent, Tony Pollard's also a free agent. And he's looking at this market and he's saying, I better get paid by the team that I'm already on. And so he wants to get paid by Indianapolis. He's been sitting out after an injury last year. Jim Irsay reportedly, a lot of tweets basically saying, like, look, when both of us are dead, no one's going to remember us. You're not that big of a deal to the game. And, it comes out that Jonathan Taylor has requested a trade. This is tough, right? Because as a general manager, as a team builder, you obviously have to do, the owner's the boss. It's his train set, his or her train set. But it also, it makes it tough sometimes because he's obviously rubbed the player the wrong way. How do you deal in a situation like this where it's messy right now?
Number one thing is, you have to address the player. You have to pull him into your respective office as a general manager, if you can, and have the discussion with him, or if it's virtual with the agent. You have to recognize the fact that in this situation that Mr. Irsay is known for having, strong, off-the-cuff, opinionated comments, which, back to Train said, it is his. He can do what he wants to do. But I think it's handling it and navigating it adeptly as a general manager and making sure that you communicate correctly, making sure that you never allude to the fact that your owner is I got to use the right word here because I'm not alluding to the fact that Mr. Irsay is, but that there's something wrong with that owner. Let's just leave it at that. You have to empathize or sympathize with the player, understand that this is a complicated situation, and it is very complicated. He said what he said. He's got some tongue in cheek to him, but then he's pretty opinionated about it. You have to navigate that. I had to navigate certain things with Arthur Blank, and I think he was one of the most thoughtful owners out there. But you remember that he had comments about Julio Jones being on our team for his career. Yep. This was before we were negotiating. I didn't make any comments about that out in the media and roll my eyes. That's really important. You don't do that. He had a point. We would love to have loved that player to be there for that many years. You just have to navigate it. You have to make sure that you're being correct with how you're communicating. And hopefully you can mollify the situation as a general manager when your owner is being strong about it. That's an important part.
Mollify, by the way, a Thomas Dimitroff word that you will also see in a lot of mathematics textbooks. Love that crossover there, Thomas. No, it's a great point. And the Colts, they let Edgerrin James go after a 1,500-yard season. They won the Super Bowl the following year. They gave Edge a ring, right? But you look at the history of the position. I can't necessarily blame Jim Irsay, for kind of his orientation here, especially the way the league is going. It's a tough situation. I will say this before we move on to the next topic. For everybody that says it's okay to draft running backs as long as you don't pay them, I think this is a good example of if you draft a player and he's good, this thing, it's not easy just letting him walk in free agency. It's an idealistic thing that a lot of us nerds have come up with of, it's okay to draft a player at a let's say not premium position as long as you let them walk when it's time to pay them. These players are wising up to this and saying, no, you're not using me for 4 years and letting me walk when I'm out of my prime. We want to get paid. And so this is an example of the rubber meets the road sometimes with players. And it's not as simple as just treating them like they're an asset. So that's one example. Speaking of asset, though, the Bengals had a scare this week, right? Joe Burrow rolling out to the right. You're probably, you being a very good football evaluator, you're probably watching practice as the GM at more than even the average GM. Moves out to the right, non-contact injury, laying on the ground. You're thinking Achilles, you're thinking Dan Marino, 1993, you're thinking Vinny Testaverde, 98, and all this kind of stuff. And luckily for the Bengals, it's just a calf injury. But calf injuries aren't great, right? We saw Dak Prescott in 2021. That team's leading the league in offense in the first 5-6 games. He gets a calf injury, comes back after a couple weeks off. They're never the same, right? It's tough to play quarterback when you're injured. Bengals had to deal with this last year. Burrow had a appendectomy in the preseason, started out slow. They finally came on at the end. I think Zach Taylor's a phenomenal coach, right? To sort of guide this team through that kind of stuff. When you're a general manager and you're thinking to yourself, in that moment when you're wondering, okay, do we got to go into the season with a backup quarterback? Do we got to go out there and salvage this thing? your heart's got to be up in your throat in that situation.
You gasp, no question about it. You go to the bad spots, right? As you mentioned, the Achilles, the ACL, the catastrophic injuries. But like you said, a calf strain is nothing to shake a stick at. I mean, depending on the severity, it can be a major impediment through the season. It can be nagging. Burrow's in such great shape for the most part. You're also with a quarterback that's relying on his ability to move around, right? I'm a big believer in that. You get a stand tall guy. Matt Ryan he missed 1.5 games in his entire career for injury. But when he had his toe injury, we were thinking, okay, sit back in there. He'll be fine. Some of those bigger quarterbacks, when you get the movement quarterbacks and they have an injury like that, that's a complicated thing as a GM to look at, or of course, as a head coach. And you wonder, look, I mean, what are they saying? Potentially get to the first game. Their first game is with the Browns, right? First game?
So they opened as 2.5-point favorites on the road against Cleveland. And that market kind of flipped all the way to Cleveland being 2.5-point favorites. So there's a little bit of a signal that they don't think he's going to, the market doesn't, the people who are putting money on these games, they don't think that Burrow is going to play week 1, or at least it's a little bit in doubt that he'll be 100%. And so that kind of hurts them a little bit, right? Because you think about, your former team, the Browns, a lot of good players on that team. And there's a quarterback that I think a lot of people well regard. The Pittsburgh Steelers have never had a losing season under Tomlin. And obviously Baltimore, there's some buzz out there about Todd Monken, Lamar Jackson, Odell, Zay Flowers. From my contacts there, looks fantastic. This is the class of that division, but there are 3 good teams that are nipping at their heels. So this is one where I think if you're thinking about the AFC, where there's going to be some good teams, Thomas, that don't make the playoffs in the AFC. And, the Bengals, they dodged a bullet, but it's still not going to be an easy ride for them, given how hard their division is and how hard the conference as a whole is.
Look, Duke Tobin is one of the best evaluators in his position in the league. And I still look at who they're looking at as a backup quarterback. Let's see if you know who it is. Have you followed who have they brought in and where are they with that? While you're looking it up, what I will say, when you're a general manager and you have a kind of just so called the way it is, maybe a potential also ran as your guy, you're worried. Can that guy pull you out of one game? You don't want to lose any division games in this situation. And you're praying that you can get him back. And again, hopefully he's a fast healer. Hopefully you have, and remember all you up and comers that want to be a part of an organization and run the team, make sure that you have your athletic performance people completely intact, so they're ready to rehab your guys to the fullest extent, so they are ready to get them back in these quick times. People might think, anyone's the same. They're not the same in this league. You have to do your due diligence and making sure you get your right doctors, your right rehab people, your right performance people to make sure they get back your studs on the field as soon as possible.
Yeah, Trevor Siemian, the backup for the Bengals, they were working out they worked out some players who had previously been in the XFL. Jake Browning's third string for them. Browning famously was the one vaccinated Vikings quarterback when Cousins, Mon, and all those guys went out that one summer. And Mike Zimmer famously, lauded him, and ultimately he wasn't good enough to make the team that year. But, a couple guys who, Simeon's played in the league. He hasn't really won a start in a long time, but he's a guy that's at least taken some snaps in the NFL as the backup there. They have a tremendous supporting cast of skill guys. They brought Orlando Brown in from Kansas City to be their left tackle. That moves Lael Collins and Jonah Williams to the right side. Whoever is the better of those two will play. It's a better offensive line situation. It's not a great one. So I think to your point about Burrow's maneuverability, that's been, when you're building a football team, Thomas, you're not going to go from, a team that was 2-14 in 2019 to a complete roster in just a few seasons. They struggle on the offensive line, and Burrow to your point, he covers that up. He covers a multitude of those sins, and without him there, it might be tougher for them to have success. Last point of news, speaking of covering a multitude of sins, Jalen Ramsey, we talk about the secondary a lot, and that was your specialty when you were early on as a scout. I look at this Miami defense and this Miami team in general. You're in a division with Buffalo. You're in a division with New York with Aaron Rodgers now. You can't forget about New England, a good football team, brought Bill O'Brien in to call plays. Your defense was supposed to be one of the better in football, but it was it was built around a player in Jalen Ramsey who made everybody better. Jalen Ramsey tears his patella tendon, his meniscus, and now he's out till December. That leaves them a little short at corner. That puts a lot of pressure on everybody, right? And that's the thing about superstar players, is that they're these pillars on your team, that the phrase that you use, but when they go down, it makes everybody else's job harder.
Well, Vic Fangio, right? They bring in Vic. They think Vic is going to be the dude that's going to bring them and resurrect whatever. Who was their D coordinator last year?
Josh Boyer, I think.
Josh Boyer. I think you're right. Well, when you think about Vic Fangio coming in and having the right people around him, of course he's a very good defensive coach and coordinator, and the expectations are high. You bring in Ramsey again, thinking, some people were throwing darts at Les, for moving him. What do they know about him? There are certain elements of Ramsey that obviously is awesome and are great. And there are other elements that they know. You're not getting rid of your free agents that are studs, not just for money. Like, that has to be well worth your money to keep them, of course. So they move them to Miami, and the expectations are high. When I was reading today about the guys that were thinking about backing him up, they're guys that I'm not that quite that comfortable with saying that I've evaluated them. And again, that's how he's supposed to be out until the beginning, or what, till December?
Yeah. So December, right. And so they brought in Eli Apple. Eli Apple has been a serviceable player after being a first-round pick, but is not, he's available for a reason. Noah Igbenogany was a first-round pick 1 year where they had 3 first-round picks. He's mostly struggled since going in. Xavier Howard is a real corner in the NFL, a good player, but a streaky guy. And they got this guy named Javon Holland who plays safety, who's very good at kind of that slot and safety position. So he can cover a little bit of that. But what Ramsey did so well was he was like Charles Woodson, right? Like when Charles Woodson was in Green Bay, he did everything, right? He played in the nickel, he blitzed, he manned up on tight ends when the tight end was good. He played outside when the guy was an alpha on the outside. He did so many of those things where there was never a player on the Packers defense back then. Nick Collins, I'm trying to think of some of those other guys. There were never Tremont Williams. There were never players. They always shined because they never had to do anything they were bad at. And I think that's kind of what the Woodsons, the Derwin Jameses, the Ramseys do for a defense. And so I think that there are going to be at times situations for this defense where it's Xavier Howard's going to struggle a little bit because he's on a number one. Or, Javon Holland's not going to be able to blitz as much. He's not going to be able to add as much value. Beat Gamer 99 says, Xavier Howard, I feel, has declined since he was really good a few years ago. That's true, but cornerback play is streaky. So hopefully he can, for the Dolphins' sake, evolve. It's your point about Fangio. Fangio is a guy as a force multiplier, as a play caller. He can get the most out of a team. And so I think the Dolphins will be fine, but you're in a conference again where, week 1 you're facing Justin Herbert, right? And then you got Josh Allen twice. You got Aaron Rodgers twice. It's not going to be an easy road for this team.
This is not a small deal. This is a big deal. I don't mean to inflame. It's a big deal. Not just a big deal because you paid the money for him, you brought him in. It's the expectations of that position, like it is a DN, like it is a left tackle, like it is, of course, the quarterback. Those are big moves when those guys go down, or a stud receiver. You're counting on it. All along, you're thinking all in the offseason, man, we are so excited we have Jalen Ramsey to pull us along here. And then, boom, again, Vic's the kind of guy that can make the most out of it. He'll scheme a certain way. He'll get the right person in there, whatever he does, but it's still not Jalen Ramsey's talent. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, before we finish up here, let's talk about our sponsor here at Circa Sports. Circa Sports is running their Millions competition, their Survivor competition, circasports.com for all that information. You sign up in Vegas, you can play anywhere. We'll be there at the end of August to help people sort of sign up. We'll also do our show there. It'll be a lot of fun. Circa Sports, one of the best experiences in all of Vegas, one of the best experiences in all of gaming. We're really proud of them, proud that we have them as one of our sponsors. I'm really excited for that.
There were rumors that you tattooed Circa Sports on your back shoulder blade. I think it was a right shoulder blade.
Well, yeah, it's, right underneath my, where it says, I'm one of those that tattooed my name on the back, like it's a jersey. And then underneath it says Circa Sports. It hurt a little bit because Thomas, I'm getting a little bit thick. I'm starting to slim out a little bit, and I got some. I don't have as much fat back there anymore, so it did hurt a lot to get that tattoo. But I'm glad that you noticed.
We want to support our guys, our sponsors, man. I love it. Good for Circa.
Last thing I wanted to talk about was development, because what I find so cool, and it's going to be brief. We'll talk about this in more in depth probably a little bit later in the season, but we show up and, like, for example, Kansas City, everybody's talking about Najee Johnson before he goes out with an ACL. You go to other places and it's like a guy like, Kansas City again, Sky Moore, Jalen Naylor in Minnesota. Like there are players that have emerged in training camp that they weren't much of anything their first couple of years, and now they're being thought of as real players on their team. Some of that is surprising to the public only because the public doesn't understand kind of age curves and development curves. Namely that, like, some positions like tight end and offensive, this as well as anybody, offensive line, defensive line, some other things, they progress slower. And then other positions like running back, they progress more quickly. How much has there ever been a training camp where you came in and some guy that you drafted and you didn't think, he was around, right? But you didn't think that he was going to be a contributor, just absolutely wowed you in training camp?
Well, I think there are a number of guys that maybe not wowed me where I was thinking, wow, we really had a chance to develop this person. I think that's, quite honestly, when you were talking about all this, I was thinking the other way. How many times we had massive expectations for players, and I don't mean this to be negative, and they weren't developed. And this is one of my sort of tidbits of advice to the rising executives. I mean, when you're putting together, forgive me for digressing here, but when you're putting together your staff with your head coach, make sure that you have a full slate of developers on that staff and not just a whole bunch of guys that are scheming on the board. They're not developing your talent. It doesn't matter how great you guys draft as a head coach and a general manager and your respective staffs. If you're not developing them, you're in a really funky spot moving forward. So I would say there's many more of those than the guys that came off like really amazing me, that a lot of those guys that I thought could develop had developed into being solid, right? Mm-hmm. There were many receivers like that. There were the odd defensive ends like that. Although I will say my history with the defensive ends while at Atlanta, we never really developed them the way that we thought we could develop them. So I think that's probably in my mind quite often. So I'm sorry for digressing. Look,
no, it's good. I mean,
it's a huge
that's huge, right? I mean, you're taking a risk when you go into a season because you have a choice, right? Like, I think many GMs would rather say, okay, I drafted this guy 2 years ago. It's nut cutting time for this guy, right? It's shit or get off the pot. And, I think a lot of coaches, to your point, and not to disparage any people, would rather you go out and sign a free agent. But free agents, they're expensive. You're almost never signing a free agent who's a value. Free agents, the market is efficient. So if you go out there and get a defensive end for $15 million a year, that's a $15 million player. Whereas if a guy's coming into year 3 on a first-round contract, that's a $5 million player. And if he can get you to 20, that's $15 million of surplus value. And that's like every general manager would prefer the draft pick, develop. And that's why, guys, when you think about assistant coaches, you think about Jeff Stoutland in Philadelphia. You think about, Vic Fangio. You think about, Steve Spagnuolo, the defensive coordinator in Kansas City. You think about three rookie guys.
You think about Jeff Ulbrich, who's now turned it around in the Jets. They were 4th overall last year. Jeff was one of the best developing linebacker coaches I've ever seen. I mean, He obviously has to continue to prove himself, and I think he will as a D coordinator. What he got out of the linebackers, Devondre Cameron, Deion Jones, and even Camille Ishmael, who was not a starting linebacker, but he did what he did and made the most out of him. My point on that is not just to laud Jeff, although I like Jeff a lot. There are guys out there that can really benefit your organization. They're going to benefit everyone in the development, not only of the position group, but the defense in general. And I think it's really, really important. And it can't be undersold. I know you've also talked about here, there are certain positions that develop later. I'd love to continue to talk. I know do we have 5 more minutes to talk about that?
Like there are so what I like, and this is hopefully if you come to us at Sumer Sports, you become a client, we'll help you with this, but like there are metrics where you can sort of help a guy develop. And, we're building a lot of those here, but there's also just rules of thumb, right? Like my colleague at PFF, Timo Risky, really did a good job with this. It's like some positions develop later and they're cheaper, right? So like tight end's a position that develops really late. You think about all of the tight ends in the NFL that have broken out. They almost all break out for their second team. You think about, Evan Ingram, you think about OJ Howard, think about OJ Howard hasn't broken out yet, but TJ Hawkinson, Eric Ebron, basically every guy the Lions have drafted at tight end has been better with the next team. And you look and you're like, okay, well, that's a position maybe where you can let him develop on a different team and sign him because he's cheaper, right?
Was Tony Gonzalez better with the second team?
I mean,
come on, give it to us. I think he was.
I think so, but yeah, exactly. And Tony Gonzalez is like the unicorn that was pretty good year 2 of his NFL career.
Of course.
But yeah, to your point, or you think about, like I think about other positions, like Jawan Taylor is a good prospect. He has been an average at best tackle in Jacksonville. The Chiefs had to pay $20 million APY for him, right? And now they believe in Andy Heck and they believe in his ability to get the most out of it. But if you want to go out and get a developmental free agent tackle, it's going to cost you an arm and a leg, right? So you're better off, of course, drafting that guy, getting him into the building with your already good offensive line coach and building him yourself, right? And getting out ahead of it. So the positional differences are incredibly important to know as a general manager and as a team builder.
Safeties. Let's go there for a second because
what's your Ricardo Allen, right? Like Ricardo was a 5th round pick. You guys let him go, right? He was practice squad. He was this, that, and the other thing. And he develops into a guy that does a lot of stuff for you really well. And he was $6 million when he got his extension, 3 years, 19 or something like that. And that's nothing, right? Relative to if you go out and get a comparable defensive end, it's 3 times that much, right? And so you think about like safety position, it's like, is that a position you necessarily need to develop, or is that a position you could pick up in free agency?
Well, we talked about that way back when we were evaluating safeties, and I had mentioned, our move. We've made moves when Dan was there. He had a real affection towards, really kick-ass safeties, and going in the first round after the safety. We just so everyone knows, you always go to your head coach as a general manager and you press them. Give me the exact weighting of importance of the positions in this defense or offense. And if you're weighting your safety as, he's the 3rd or 4th, and you're telling me as a general manager, we need to go after this guy and get him in the first round, well, then there's a conversation to be had, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, Kiki was on. Well, I mean, I love him.
It's a good point. And also it's interesting because like, you look at like, for example, Lewis Cine in Minnesota. It's like Lewis Cine wasn't even starting year 1 because they were depending on him in Minnesota to be the everything, everywhere, all at once, Harrison Smith complement. And that's a hard thing to pull off in 1 year. So you're in a 4-year rookie window for a position that you could have acquired in free agency for a lot cheaper. And you're cutting into a year of that where he's playing special teams. Yeah. And he got hurt, and it's unfortunate, but it's one of those, again, to your point, it's like every single year Trey Boston was available. Every single year guys like that were available. And yet you had, and I'm not disparaging the Seahawks. I think the world of Schneider and Carroll, but they spent 2 first-round picks on Jamal Adams.
Yes.
And it's like, I don't know, like those are first-round picks you could have spent on a quarterback, and luckily for them, they traded Russell Wilson and got a lot of those picks back, and they've been able to use them on tackles and wide receivers and corners and stuff. But it is interesting when you think about development. You really have to think about the age curves, and you also have to think about the value and can you access this in free agency should you make a mistake. One of my good friends in the league said every single time we overpaid for a free agent, it's because we could not develop a player in the draft at that position, and that's an important thing to realize.
It's a great thing to realize. And backtrack for a second to Pete Carroll and Jamal, right? Adams. We're talking about that move. What a lot of people don't know, and I'm just, it's a little tidbit. I mean, Pete loves defensive backs, right? I remember Pete back in the day, he'd be playing hoop all the time. You want to talk about a guy who can move back in the day. He can move around you and juke you on the court, as athletic as you like to think you are, Eric. But he loved the defensive backs. He was always bonded with them in so many ways. When you're a head coach, you have an affection towards or affinity towards those guys that you have a real bond with. I'm sure he and John Schneider sat down and talked about the importance. I think John was a safety as well. Short safety. And
yeah, I mean, Pete Carroll, when he was a coach, he coached the Vikings secondary when Joey Browner was there. He coached the Jets secondary when Ronnie Lott was there. Like, he's seen some safeties, right?
And my point is, he saw some really good safeties, and he knows how important those safeties are. You hope that you can get them at a different price. You hope that you can get a great value out of them. Again, back to us drafting Keanu Neal. We thought Keanu Neal was going to be the end-all, be-all. And unfortunately, he had some injury strings. Everything about him personality-wise was exactly what Pete Carroll was thinking about with Jamal. You get a dude in there who's in the back in the secondary, and he's ruling it all back here. Get a cool linebacker and a cool nose, and I think –
and I think to your point about – and to finish this off, I think about your point about Dan Quinn. The last 2 years, Jaron Kearse is one of the best stories in all of football. 7th-round pick out of Clemson, was kind of okay in Minnesota, not much. Goes to Dallas, is used properly, and is one of the most productive safeties in all of football. And I think predominantly because Dan Quinn saw a big physical athlete that could do a lot of things for him, and luckily for Dallas, at the right price, right? A free agent kind of that is not sought after by many of the teams. And it just shows. And Dan brought Keanu Neal there. He brought, Anthony Barr. The thing, one thing that Dan Quinn really prizes, from what I can tell, is versatility. And he's been able to nail it since he's been in Dallas, which has been such a great come up for him. So this has been great. I can't wait for more of this. So we're going to continue to have news come in. Thomas and I are going to go back to one episode on Wednesdays, one episode on Mondays in the near future here. This has been a lot. I've really enjoyed talking about this, and the news keeps piling in. And hopefully this podcast is giving you the coverage of that news that no other podcast can or is capable of giving you. So episode 85 of the Circa Sports Show for Thomas Dimitroff. This has been Eric Eager. We thank you all for joining. Please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. We can't wait to see you next time.